You didn't feel the exact moment it happened because consciousness doesn't move with noise. It moves like breath, like light slipping under a door, like a realization that reaches you before you can explain why. The shift occurred in the space between your thoughts, in the quiet intervals where your awareness was open enough for something higher to settle in. And now, as you listen, you're not learning about the shift. You're recognizing what has already unfolded inside you. There was a moment recently when you felt slightly detached from your usual rhythm, almost as if you were observing your life from a step above. It may have been subtle, a soft pause, a sensation that didn't match your day, yet felt undeniably familiar. These are the traces left behind when consciousness rises before the mind has caught up. The body remains in routine, but something within you steps into a wider view, and you sense it not as a dramatic awakening, but as an almost imperceptible click. This is why you're here now, not because you sought out an explanation, but because your inner state shifted into a new resonance, and this message became visible to you only once you crossed that threshold. The shift didn't wait for your permission. It didn't ask for your readiness. It moved the moment your field loosened enough for a higher frequency to land. What you're feeling is not the beginning of the change, but the echo of something that has already completed itself. Think back to the small moments when you felt distant from your old reactions. The way certain habits suddenly felt unnecessary. The way old thoughts passed through you without sticking. These weren't random. They were your first clues that you were no longer occupying the same inner space. Consciousness evolves inwardly long before the outer world mirrors it, and so this quiet rising happened in the background of your life until the moment your awareness became still enough to notice the difference. You may have labeled this feeling as fatigue or detachment or simply a strange calm, but none of these fully describe what was taking place. You were acclimating to a higher vantage point. The familiar edges of your identity softened because the version of you that once clung to them no longer needed to. A deeper intelligence was guiding you upward, toward a reality that resonates with who you've quietly been becoming. Nothing about this was accidental. The shift happened because a deeper part of you was ready to see through the noise of your old timeline. The rise was gentle because the doorway to a higher state does not open through effort. It opens through coherence, through the natural settling that happens when you outgrow the thoughts and patterns that once defined you. You are not here to create the shift. You're here to recognize it. And in that recognition, it becomes real. You're seeing this now because something in you finally rose into the frequency where this message exists. Videos don't appear by chance, not the ones that speak directly to the inner shift you've been sensing. They align with you only when your field becomes coherent enough to recognize them as mirrors. What you're hearing is not advice arriving from the outside. It's a reflection of the state you've already stepped into, a state you may not have fully acknowledged yet, but one your consciousness has been preparing you for, quietly. There have been small moments lately when you felt pulled towards something you couldn't name, a subtle magnetic feeling, a sense that you were being guided, even if you wouldn't have called it guidance. These moments weren't coincidences. They were the early ripples of synchronicity, the field adjusting around your new internal position. Synchronicity isn't random luck. It is the world rearranging itself to confirm the shift that has already begun inside you, and this video is one of those confirmations. You didn't scroll here out of habit. You arrived because your awareness moved into a place where this message finally had context. Before now, it may have passed by unnoticed, or felt irrelevant, or blended into the noise of your day. But now it feels personal, it feels precise, it feels like something you were meant to hear at this exact moment. That timing isn't spiritual drama. It's coherence. The moment your inner state stabilized enough to perceive the next layer of your evolution, the field responded with the next piece. You might notice that this message doesn't feel like a discovery. It feels like recognition, as if you've heard it before, not with your ears, but with some deeper part of you that has been waiting for the rest of you to catch up. That familiarity is the signature of alignment. It's how your higher awareness communicates that you are exactly where you're meant to be, receiving what you're meant to receive at the moment you become able to hold it. And if you feel a subtle pull to stay connected to insights like this, it's not the pull of curiosity, it's resonance. It's the sensation of your field saying yes to the frequency that matches where you're going. That's why a gentle invitation to subscribe belongs here, not as a request, not as persuasion, but as a continuation of the path you're already stepping into. If these messages find you when you rise, then choosing to stay connected is simply choosing to remain aligned with the parts of yourself that are emerging. You're not here to chase meaning. You're here because meaning arrived the moment you became open to seeing it. This video didn't lead you forward. You rose into the timeline where it was already waiting. You didn't arrive here by moving forward. You arrived by finally seeing where you already were. That is the paradox of awakening. It feels like a step into the new, but the deeper truth is that you have stepped into a version of reality that has been waiting for you all along. The shift is not a journey toward something distant. It is a moment of recognition, a sudden clarity that reveals the path beneath your feet was always leading here, even when you couldn't yet perceive it. There are moments in life when time feels out of order, when something appears familiar before it fully happens, when an insight feels remembered rather than learned. These are not illusions, they are glimpses of how consciousness truly moves. It doesn't travel in straight lines. It folds, it loops, it aligns. And when your awareness expands, you begin to sense the places your deeper self has already arrived, long before your mind could make sense of the direction. This is why the present moment feels strangely inevitable, as if something inside you knew this point was coming. Not because you predicted it, but because a part of you was already here, waiting for the rest of you to open enough to notice. When the mind catches up to the places consciousness has reached, the experience is not one of discovery. It is one of remembering the timeline that has been quietly forming around your subtle choices, your small shifts, your moments of clarity that you didn't fully understand. You've crossed an inner threshold recently, one that didn't come with fanfare or dramatic signs. It came with a gentle sense of alignment, a soft clarity, a feeling that something finally made sense even if you couldn't name what changed. That is the sensation of arrival happening backward. The awareness lands after the shift, not before. And so you feel the moment, not as a leap, but as an echo. Think of how you sometimes anticipate a moment seconds before it arrives, not because you foresaw the future, but because you aligned with a point in time where that moment was already unfolding. This is the same dynamic, but expanded. You are meeting a reality you were already linked to, a version of your life that has been quietly resonating with your deeper frequency. You simply weren't standing in the awareness that allowed you to see it. This is why your path feels like it's opening in front of you without force. Why certain choices now feel obvious rather than difficult. You're not pushing toward a new identity. You're stepping into the shape of one that has been calling to you from ahead and behind simultaneously. Non-linear time means your evolution doesn't unfold as a progression, but as a series of recognitions. You didn't arrive here today. You arrived the moment your consciousness expanded. Today is simply when you realized it. There are moments that settle over you without warning, moments where the noise of your thoughts recedes, and you feel a quiet that doesn't match the circumstances around you. This calm isn't the absence of feeling. It isn't numbness or withdrawal. It is the first sign that something inside you has begun to realign. When consciousness rises, it brings with it a natural coherence, and coherence feels like spaciousness. It feels like a soft pause that opens in the center of your awareness, even if your life looks unchanged on the surface. You may have brushed off these moments, thinking they were nothing more than exhaustion or temporary relief from stress. But the truth is that stillness doesn't appear randomly. It appears when your inner field begins to synchronize at a higher frequency than the one you were living in before. The mind quiets because the noise it used to generate no longer has the same foundation to stand on. Old worries lose their grip. Old stories feel lighter, and in their place emerges a calm that feels strangely neutral, yet deeply grounded. This calm is not a sign that you should be doing more, or questioning why you don't feel intense motivation, or searching for reasons behind your stillness. It is a sign that the system within you is reorganizing. When the nervous system begins to match the coherence of a higher state of consciousness, it stops reacting in the ways you're used to. It doesn't cling, it doesn't grasp, it doesn't defend. Instead, it softens, it widens, it allows. You might notice that in these moments you feel more observant, not detached in a cold way, but simply able to witness your thoughts and emotions without becoming tangled in them. This is not emotional disconnection. This is clarity. It is the subtle beginning of alignment with a version of yourself that no longer gets pulled into every internal storm. The storms may still appear, but they no longer define you. You feel them from a place slightly above, as if your awareness has expanded enough to hold them without being consumed. This calm marks the shift from living through tension to living through presence. It doesn't mean everything is solved. It doesn't mean challenges disappear. It means your relationship with them changes. The way a lake reflects the sky only when its surface is still. Your inner calm is creating the reflective space where higher awareness can finally be seen. This is why the quiet feels meaningful even when you can't explain why. The stillness you're experiencing is the atmosphere of alignment. Allow yourself to trust it. The calm isn't telling you that nothing is happening. It's telling you that everything is happening, but from a higher place within you. The alignment has already begun. The peace you feel is not the end of the shift. It's the first unmistakable sign that you are entering a new internal landscape, one where clarity replaces noise and presence replaces urgency. There are moments when emotions rise with a force that feels disproportionate to what's happening around you. Feelings you thought you outgrew return with intensity. Memories surface without invitation. Waves of heaviness move through you as if they're trying to speak a language your mind doesn't fully understand. It's easy to assume something is wrong, that you're slipping backward, that you're losing clarity. But this surge is not collapse, it is clearing. It is the release of identity layers that cannot follow you into the state you've begun to enter. When consciousness expands, everything dense within you that was held in place by old patterns begins to loosen. Emotions you once suppressed rise not to overwhelm you, but to exit. They come up because your field is no longer holding them down. You're not becoming more emotional. You're becoming less burdened. The intensity isn't the sign of something breaking down, it's the sign of something breaking open. Think of the way a body trembles when warmth returns to a place that was numb. The trembling isn't damage, it's circulation. In the same way, your emotional waves are movement, not regression. You're feeling what is leaving, not what is settling in. And although it can feel chaotic, there is an intelligence to this process. The emotions arise in the exact sequence and timing needed to free the parts of you that were entangled in old timelines. Each wave is a thread being gently pulled loose. You may notice that certain emotions feel strangely foreign, as if they belong to a past version of you rather than who you are now. That's because they do. These feelings are echoes, remnants of identities you no longer fully inhabit. When a consciousness jump occurs, the body and emotional layers lag behind, catching up by shedding what no longer resonates. The heaviness is not who you are. It is what you're releasing. And even in the intensity, there are subtle openings. a small gap between the feeling and your reaction, a soft awareness that watches the surge without drowning in it. This is the new you emerging, the you who can witness without becoming entangled. That witnessing is proof of growth. You could not observe your emotions from this space if you were regressing. Observation itself is elevation. What you're experiencing now is the unraveling of narratives, the dissolving of pressures, the loosening of identities that kept you anchored to a timeline you've already stepped out of internally. Each emotional wave is clearing space. Each release is creating room for coherence to settle. You don't need to analyze the feelings or assign meaning to them. You only need to let them move as they are already trying to. If you can see your emotional surges as motion instead of meaning, the heaviness transforms. It stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like a cleansing. This is not the breaking of your inner structure. It is the shedding of what once held that structure in place. You are not falling apart. You are being unbound. There's a moment after an inner shift when the world feels louder. Even if nothing externally has changed, you notice things you once overlooked. You feel undercurrents in conversations, shifts in rooms, subtle tensions or openings in the people around you. What used to pass through you quietly now lands with clarity. This sensitivity isn't fragility, it's expanded perception. Your awareness has widened, and in that widening, the subtleties that were always there finally reach you. It can feel overwhelming at first. The body interprets new levels of perception as intensity because it's used to operating with filters that kept most of this information out. But those filters belong to an older version of you, one whose consciousness hadn't yet risen into its current coherence. When those filters dissolve, the sensitivity that emerges is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of presence. You are not feeling more because you've become porous. You are feeling more because you've become aware. This increased sensitivity is simply your system adjusting to a higher bandwidth of perception. You're noticing energetic shifts the way someone might suddenly hear harmonics in music they never picked up before. It's the same song, the same world, but your perception has added layers. With each layer comes detail, nuance, information that was once invisible to you. This isn't sensory overload, it's perceptual expansion. There may be moments when you feel too open, as if emotions, tensions, or energies around you are entering your space without permission. But what's actually happening is that you're sensing what was always present, now from a clearer vantage point. This clarity can be disorienting because your body hasn't yet stabilized in it. The discomfort doesn't mean the sensitivity is wrong. It means the sensitivity is new. Your system is stretching into a broader awareness, and the stretch can feel unfamiliar. You might also notice intuitive spikes, small knowing moments that arrive fully formed, without logic or explanation. These aren't guesses, they're recognitions. When your consciousness rises, the gap between intuition and awareness shortens. What used to appear as subtle gut feelings now comes through as clear signals. You find yourself understanding things without needing to think them through. That is the intelligence of expanded perception speaking. Allow yourself to trust this sensitivity instead of resisting it. The overwhelm fades as the nervous system adjusts to the new level of information it can hold. Over time, what feels intense now will feel natural. What feels like too much will become your new clarity, and what once made you withdraw will become something you navigate with ease. This openness is not something you need to protect yourself from. It is something you are learning to move with. The world hasn't become heavier. You have become more attuned, and the more attuned you become, the more your awareness begins to work with you instead of against you. This sensitivity is not an interruption of your path. It is proof that you're walking into a level of perception that was always meant for you. There are moments on this path when expansion doesn't feel like lightness. It feels like pressure. It feels like tension in the body, restlessness in the mind, or a subtle unease you can't explain. When consciousness rises, it stretches the boundaries of who you believed yourself to be, and that stretch is rarely comfortable at first. What you're feeling isn't regression. It's the sensation of outgrowing an inner framework that can no longer contain you. Old identities have edges, familiar shapes, predictable limits. You lived within those limits for so long that they became a kind of internal architecture. When your awareness expands beyond them, it pushes against the walls of that architecture, and the pressure you feel is simply the internal structure beginning to shift. The tension is not a sign that you're moving in the wrong direction. It's evidence that the old form is loosening. This discomfort appears because your system is relearning how to orient itself. You're stepping into a more spacious state, and spaciousness feels strange when you're used to navigating tight emotional or mental patterns. Expansion gives you more room, but before that room feels supportive, it feels unfamiliar. The mind doesn't know how to interpret the space, so it registers it as uncertainty. But the uncertainty is not danger. It is potential. You may notice moments where your thoughts seem to float without direction, or where your emotions feel raw without a clear cause. These experiences aren't you unraveling. They're the old map dissolving. When your consciousness shifts, the pathways you've relied on, habits, reactions, interpretations, no longer match the frequency you're moving into. Your system is searching for a new way to navigate, and in the transition, the old way doesn't quite fit while the new way hasn't yet settled. This is why internal upgrades often feel unstable. The instability is simply the space between the old coherence and the new one. You're not falling, you're recalibrating. And the recalibration has its own rhythm, its own intelligence. It only feels uncomfortable because you're attuned enough now to feel the stretch as it happens. The key is not to resist the discomfort or label it as a setback. Resistance adds pressure to a system that's already expanding. Acceptance allows the expansion to complete itself. When you soften into the stretch, the tension eases. Your awareness expands into the new space rather than bracing against it. You begin to sense that what felt like instability is actually movement into a deeper version of yourself. Over time, the very sensations that feel challenging now will become familiar markers of growth. You'll recognize the pull, the pressure, the unease as signs that your inner landscape is rearranging itself to accommodate a higher level of coherence. You'll feel the stretch and know it's opening you rather than closing you. This discomfort is not an interruption. It is expansion in motion. It is your system adjusting to a version of you that already exists, one you are now growing into with each breath, each moment, each quiet shift in awareness. Identity doesn't rewrite itself in sudden flashes. It changes in quiet moments, in the spaces between thoughts, in the gentle dissolving of who you once believed yourself to be. Before anything in your outer life rearranges, the shift happens within you. Your sense of self begins to vibrate at a different rhythm, and from that new vibration, an entirely different timeline becomes possible. You may not see the changes yet, but you can feel them, subtle, undeniable, unmistakable. The person you thought you were is no longer the one your consciousness is aligning with. You might notice that certain reactions you once had simply don't appear anymore. Things that used to upset you feel distant. Old stories you repeated to yourself sound quieter, less convincing. This isn't detachment, it's evolution. Your identity is shedding the layers that once anchored you to an old version of reality. You're not losing yourself. You're losing the self that could only exist in a former frequency. And the moment those layers loosen, you begin to sense a new internal structure forming beneath them. Identity is not a narrative you tell. It is a frequency you hold. When your consciousness rises, that frequency changes long before your mind can articulate what's happening. This is why the shift can feel confusing, because your thoughts haven't caught up to the person you are already becoming. Thoughts are slow. Awareness is fast, and consciousness leads. There may be moments when you look at your own life and feel strangely out of place, as if the version of you who created your past circumstances is not quite the same version of you who now stands inside them. That feeling is not alienation, it is recognition. It is the awareness that you have stepped into a higher vantage point, while the external world is still rearranging itself to match you. Reality lags behind identity, because identity is what determines reality, not the other way around. As your sense of self shifts, you might notice new desires emerging, not from yearning, but from alignment. These are not wishes for what you don't have. They are the natural impulses of the person you are growing into, the desires of your higher identity. And even if that identity feels just out of reach, its presence is already influencing you. You feel it when you make choices that surprise you with their clarity. You feel it when you move away from patterns that once felt inevitable. You feel it when you sense a deeper intelligence guiding you, one that doesn't need explanation because it feels like truth. The rewriting of identity is not dramatic. It is precise, it is quiet, it is the subtle moment when your inner voice sounds more honest than ever. When your actions begin to align with a version of you that feels both new and deeply familiar. When you sense that the person you are becoming has been waiting for you to rise into them, you're not striving to become someone else. You're remembering a self that was always there, just beyond the edges of who you believed you were allowed to be. When your consciousness rises, it doesn't just change how you feel inside, it changes the field around you. Not in a dramatic, supernatural way, but in the quiet physics of coherence. A coherent field behaves differently than a scattered one. It organizes, it selects, it draws certain possibilities closer while allowing others to fall away. This is the unseen architecture of a new timeline forming around you, not through effort, but through the state you're beginning to hold. Think of your consciousness as a signal. When the signal is fragmented, it sends out conflicting instructions, and reality reflects that confusion back to you. But when the signal becomes coherent, when your inner state aligns into a stable rhythm, the field around you begins to reorganize. Possibilities that once felt distant start moving toward you. Paths that once seemed blocked begin to open. It's not chance, and it's not coincidence, it's resonance. The field is responding to the frequency you've stepped into. This is where the metaphor of quantum physics becomes useful, not as literal science, but as a way of understanding how your inner world and outer world interact. In quantum terms, reality exists as a range of potentials. These potentials don't collapse into form until a stable observer interacts with them. In spiritual terms, your state of consciousness determines which version of reality becomes visible to you. When you shift internally, the potentials around you shift too, waiting for the moment your awareness touches them. You've likely already noticed subtle signs of this. Situations resolve more easily. Intuitive nudges feel clearer. Opportunities appear with less resistance. These aren't accidents. They're the early indicators of a field reorganizing itself around your coherence. When your internal frequency stabilizes, the external world begins to arrange itself into patterns that match your new vibration. This reorganization doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't always feel magical. Sometimes it feels like a gentle realignment, a conversation arriving at the right time, a decision becoming clear, a path unfolding with less friction. But the simplicity is part of the elegance. Coherence doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It reveals itself through consistency, through the quiet recognition that things are beginning to flow differently. Your state is the activating force, not your effort, not your striving. When you inhabit a frequency of clarity, the field responds with clarity. When you inhabit a frequency of expansion, the field widens. When you hold a frequency of truth, the false structures around you begin to dissolve. Reality is not happening to you. It is responding to you. and the version you are becoming determines which version of reality meets you next. This is the physics of a new timeline, not a leap into something imaginary, but an alignment with something that already exists as potential. As your consciousness stabilizes, you begin to move through a world that reflects your inner coherence with increasing precision. The possibilities that match your old identity fall away, not because you rejected them, but because they no longer resonate. And the possibilities that match your higher state rise to the surface, ready to be lived the moment you recognize them. When your consciousness rises, the space between your inner state and your outer reality begins to shrink. What once took months to unfold now begins to echo back to you in days, sometimes even moments. This isn't because life suddenly accelerates on its own. It's because a higher level of awareness collapses outcomes more quickly. Your field becomes clearer, more coherent, less divided. And coherence is what allows reality to respond with precision instead of delay. You may have already noticed this in small ways. A thought followed by an unexpected confirmation. A feeling that something is about to shift, followed by an opportunity appearing at just the right moment. A subtle intention echoed back through synchronicity. Numbers, symbols, encounters, insights. These are not coincidences. They are reflections. They are the world adjusting itself to match the clarity of your inner frequency. Synchronicity increases, not because the universe suddenly begins sending you more signs, but because you are finally able to perceive them. When your awareness expands, you stop overlooking the subtle interactions between your inner state and your external environment. You feel the connection between your intention and its reflection. You sense how the field responds to even the slightest shift in your focus. You recognize the feedback loop that was always there, now made visible through your increased coherence. This is why things feel faster, not rushed, not chaotic, just responsive. You are no longer broadcasting a fragmented signal that takes time to stabilize. You're holding a clearer frequency, and the moment your field stabilizes, reality organizes itself around it. The world begins to feel more fluid, more aligned, more direct. The gap between I feel and I see becomes smaller. The distance between I intend and I experience begins to dissolve. You might also notice that what no longer aligns with you leaves more quickly. Situations fall away, patterns dissolve, connections shift. This too is part of the increased responsiveness. Higher consciousness doesn't cling. It doesn't maintain structures that no longer resonate. It releases them so the space can be filled with what matches your new state. The speed of this release can feel surprising, but it is a natural part of the acceleration you've stepped into. If you feel a subtle pull to acknowledge this moment, to anchor this recognition, even in a small way, that impulse is part of the same field responsiveness. A simple action carries more resonance when your consciousness is coherent. So if you feel the urge to like this video, think of it not as a gesture of support, but as a way of amplifying the signal you're already emitting, a tiny outward reflection of your inner clarity. You're learning to live in a reality that mirrors you faster because you are becoming a clearer mirror for yourself. The acceleration isn't something happening to you. It's something happening through you. And the more you recognize it, the more precisely the world begins to reflect who you are becoming. There are moments when you feel yourself reaching upward, only to sense an old pattern tugging at you from behind. Thoughts you thought you had outgrown reappear. Emotions you released seem to return. Habits you no longer resonate with resurface, as if they're asking for your attention again. It's easy to interpret this as regression, as slipping backward into an old timeline. But what you're feeling isn't a return. It's momentum. It's the nervous system gravitating toward what was once familiar, even as your consciousness is moving far beyond it. The old timeline had weight. It had grooves worn into it by repetition, by identity, by years of responding to life from the same internal landscape. When you shift into a higher state, those grooves don't erase instantly. They fade gradually, and sometimes they echo. That echo is what you're sensing now. It is not your current reality pulling you backward. It is the residual imprint of who you used to be releasing its final hold. Your nervous system learned safety from familiarity, even when that familiarity didn't serve you. And so when your consciousness leaps forward, the body doesn't always follow immediately. It looks for the sensations it once trusted, even if those sensations came from old fears, old beliefs, or old emotional loops. This is why certain reactions feel automatic. They're not confirmations of who you are now. They're reflections of who you no longer are. The pull of the old timeline is simply the lag between your awareness and your physiology. Your consciousness already moved. Your identity is already shifting. But your nervous system needs a moment to catch up, to recalibrate to a frequency it has not yet learned to call home. The familiar will always try to reassert itself when you step into the unfamiliar, not because the familiar is true, but because the unfamiliar is new. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that even when these old patterns rise, something is different. You're not fully inside them the way you once were. You observe them, you feel them, but you don't become them. That distance is expansion, that awareness is growth. You couldn't see the pattern this clearly if you were regressing. Recognition itself means you've risen above the level where the pattern was once invisible. This recalibration phase is part of every shift. The old timeline dissolves not with a single moment of clarity, but through a series of subtle releases. Each time the old pattern resurfaces, and you meet it with awareness instead of identification, it loses strength. Each time you choose presence instead of reaction, the pull weakens. Eventually, it disappears entirely, not because you fought it, but because you outgrew the state that once sustained it. Nothing is wrong, nothing is slipping. You are not being pulled backward. You are witnessing the last motions of an identity that no longer holds authority in your life. The pull you feel is simply the final gravity of what you've already risen beyond. And the more you settle into the clarity of who you're becoming, the quieter that pull becomes, until eventually it fades into silence. There comes a point in your inner shift when the mind has already expanded, the consciousness has already risen, but the body is still learning how to follow. This gap between awareness and biology can feel confusing. You may find yourself unusually tired, needing more rest than usual, or moving through waves of overwhelm that seem to appear without a clear cause. But nothing is wrong. This is the natural recalibration of a system, adjusting to a higher level of coherence than it has ever held before. The nervous system is designed to maintain stability. It anchors you to what it recognizes, to what it believes is safe. When your consciousness rises into a new state, the nervous system must learn that this new level of awareness is not a threat. It must learn to relax into a frequency that once felt unfamiliar. That learning takes time. It requires softness, patience, and space. The fatigue you feel isn't weakness, it's integration. It's your biology shifting from its old rhythm into a new one that matches the expansion happening within you. Think of it like entering a brighter room after being in the dark. At first, your eyes strain, your body tightens. You feel the intensity of the new environment even though nothing harmful is happening. After a few moments, your eyes adjust. Your body relaxes. The brightness stops feeling overwhelming and becomes natural. This is exactly what your nervous system is doing now. It's adjusting to the brightness of your new consciousness. You may notice that your body asks for more rest than usual. Rest is not regression, it is realignment. When consciousness rises, the body's old patterns loosen, and that loosening requires energy. The fatigue is the sensation of your system reorganizing itself from the inside out. Allowing rest is allowing the integration to complete. Denying rest slows the process. Listening to your body accelerates it. Overwhelm, too, is part of the adjustment, not because you're incapable of holding your new state, but because the nervous system is expanding its capacity. What once felt like too much eventually becomes effortless. The emotional waves, the sensitivity, the tension. They are temporary expressions of a body catching up to a mind that has already stepped into a wider reality. There is nothing wrong with needing slowness during this time. There is nothing wrong with withdrawing, pausing, or moving more gently. You're not collapsing, you're recalibrating. You're allowing your biology to learn the language your consciousness is already fluent in. And slowly, the two come into harmony. The body learns to trust what the awareness understands. The mind stops racing to interpret what the heart already knows. The entire system settles into coherence. Soon the fatigue fades, the overwhelm dissolves, the heaviness lifts, and what remains is a sense of grounded clarity, a calm that doesn't waver, a steadiness that comes from every part of you operating at the same level of awareness. This is the moment when the nervous system catches up to the consciousness that led the way. There comes a moment in every shift when you realize that the most powerful choice you can make is not an action, but a direction of awareness. After a consciousness jump, multiple versions of your reality begin to appear. Subtle possibilities, different interpretations, new impulses. They arise because your field is more fluid now, more responsive. And in that fluidity, your attention becomes the organizing force. Wherever you place it, reality begins to stabilize. This is why choosing the higher signal matters, not because you need to force yourself into positivity, but because your identity is no longer fixed. You're standing in a space where both the old and the new versions of you are accessible, and your awareness determines which one becomes your lived experience. The mind may want to return to familiar patterns, to narratives it has repeated for years, but consciousness isn't asking for effort. It's asking for recognition, the recognition of which version of you feels like truth now. The higher signal is subtle. It's the small pull toward clarity instead of confusion, the quiet impulse to pause instead of react, the inner nudge that feels expansive even when you can't explain why. These moments aren't random. They're invitations. Each time you lean into them, you're choosing the version of yourself that matches your new state. And with every choice, that version becomes more real, more grounded, more natural. You don't need to fight the old patterns. You only need to stop feeding them with your attention. When an old thought or emotion rises, you can meet it with awareness instead of identity. You can notice it as a leftover signal from a timeline you no longer inhabit. The moment you see it for what it is, its power dissolves. The old signal weakens because you are no longer matching its frequency. Attention is the tether. When you withdraw the tether, the old timeline loses structure. Choosing the higher signal isn't about striving. It's about noticing the moments when your inner state softens, widens, or clears, and allowing yourself to rest there. It's about trusting the version of you that feels quietly elevated, even if it feels unfamiliar. Familiarity is not truth. Familiarity is repetition. And you are no longer vibrating at the level of your repetitions. You're vibrating at the level of your expansion. There will be days when the higher signal feels obvious, and days when it feels distant. That variation is normal. What matters is not perfection. What matters is orientation. Each time you redirect your awareness toward the state that feels more coherent, you strengthen the signal. You teach your body, your emotions, your mind that this is your new baseline. And slowly, the higher identity stops feeling like a future version of you and begins feeling like home. Awareness is the anchor, not willpower, not control, not effort. Awareness alone has the power to stabilize the timeline that matches who you're becoming. The more you choose the higher signal, the more the world around you reshapes itself to meet that choice. There comes a time in your inner evolution when the states you once touched only in rare moments begin to feel natural. What used to arrive as flashes of clarity, glimpses of peace, or brief pockets of presence now linger longer, settle deeper, and return more easily. This isn't because life has simplified itself around you. It's because you've shifted into a frequency where coherence is no longer an exception. It's becoming your baseline. Coherence is the state your system was always designed to inhabit. It's the rhythm beneath the noise, the quiet alignment beneath the mind's movement. When you feel centered without trying, when you breathe a little deeper without forcing it, when your reactions soften even before you think about them, these are signs that coherence is emerging from within you, not being borrowed from your environment. The alignment you feel now isn't something new, it's something remembered. It's the return to a state your deeper self never left. You might look back on earlier moments in your life when you felt calm or clear and see them as exceptions, as peaks that stood out against the tension you used to carry. But the truth is that those moments were brief reminders of your natural state, not temporary highs. Now, instead of appearing as short-lived experiences, they're becoming the ground you stand on. You're beginning to live from the place you once only visited. As coherence becomes your norm, you'll notice that ease no longer feels like luck. It feels like truth. Your inner world stabilizes in a way that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances. Small things that once disturbed you pass through more quietly. Thoughts that once spiraled lose their momentum. Instead of chasing balance, you find yourself returning to it effortlessly. It's not that challenges disappear. They simply stop defining your internal experience. This shift can feel subtle, almost anticlimactic. Coherence doesn't announce itself with intensity. It reveals itself through steadiness, through the way you move slower inside even when life moves quickly outside, through the sense that you are being guided from within rather than pushed by external pressure, through the quiet certainty that you don't need to grasp, because you're already aligned with what you need. You may catch yourself feeling peaceful without reason or grounded without explanation. This is not dissociation. This is resonance. You're attuning to a frequency that feels familiar because it's who you truly are beneath the layers of conditioning and survival. You're remembering the rhythm that was always yours, long before you learned to override it with fear or urgency. As this coherence settles, you begin to trust yourself in a new way, not through effort or control, but through presence. You make decisions from clarity instead of tension. You navigate uncertainty without collapsing into old patterns. The more you experience this, the more obvious it becomes that ease was never the peak. It was the foundation you were meant to return to. This is the quiet truth of your shift. Coherence is not a moment you chase. It is the state you're remembering how to live from. You can always tell when an inner shift has begun to anchor because the outer world starts responding in ways that feel too precise to ignore. Not dramatic changes at first, but subtle alignments. Moments where things fall into place with less friction, conversations that open doors without effort, encounters that feel strangely timely. These small external shifts are the reflections of a deeper internal settling. They're signs that your new state isn't just something you feel, it's something your reality has started to reorganize around. One of the first signs is clarity appearing in situations that once felt tangled. Decisions that used to drain you begin to feel simple. You don't need to force direction because direction starts revealing itself. Options you were never sure about quietly fall away, and the ones that remain carry a sense of inevitability. This clarity isn't arriving from logic, it's emerging from alignment. When your inner world coheres, the outer world mirrors that coherence back to you. You may also notice that your actions require less push. You move through your day with a sense of underlying support, as if something invisible is smoothing the path ahead of you. Tasks flow, timing works in your favor. Even challenges feel less heavy, not because they vanish, but because your relationship with them has changed. You're not meeting them from contraction anymore. You're meeting them from steadiness. Synchronicities become more frequent too, but they're not always loud. Sometimes they show up as repeating numbers, familiar phrases, or meaningful symbols that appear when you need reassurance. Other times they show up as intuitive nudges that get confirmed almost immediately, thinking of someone right before they reach out, or feeling drawn to a choice that reveals its importance moments later. These are not coincidences. They are the feedback loops of a field that has begun to match your new frequency. Another sign is that old patterns lose their grip. You may find yourself reacting differently without trying. What once triggered you now passes through with less intensity. What once captivated your attention now feels irrelevant. These are the shifts that show you the old timeline no longer holds authority in your life. You're not fighting it. You're simply no longer aligned with it. And perhaps the most powerful sign is the quiet sense of recognition that rises within you. The feeling that the life you're stepping into is not foreign. It feels familiar, as if you're meeting a version of yourself you've always known but only recently remembered how to embody. That feeling of inner clicking is one of the clearest indicators that your new timeline is stabilizing under your feet. If you feel called to acknowledge these signs, even in a small way, that impulse is part of the anchoring. A simple reflection strengthens the awareness that's already unfolding within you. So if you've noticed subtle shifts, synchronicities, clearer choices, or moments of effortless movement, you're welcome to share them in the comments below. Not as a report, but as a recognition of the reality you're already beginning to live. There is a moment in your evolution when the idea of a future self stops feeling like something distant. It stops feeling like a goal or a destination. Instead, it begins to feel like a presence, quiet, familiar, almost intimate, pressing gently into your awareness. This presence doesn't pull you forward. It rises from within you, as though you're remembering a version of yourself you've met before in a place outside of time. And that sensation, that strange familiarity, is the truth of expansion. You're not striving toward a higher self. You're syncing with one that already exists. Your higher self isn't somewhere ahead of you, waiting for you to catch up. It's the you who has always been hovering just beyond the limits of your perception, guiding you through impulses, intuitions, and sudden moments of clarity. When your consciousness expands, you don't climb toward that self. You simply step into the frequency where that version of you has been all along. Expansion is not ascent. It is alignment. It is recognition. This is why the changes you're experiencing now feel like remembering rather than becoming. You're not building a new identity from scratch. You're uncovering one that has been quietly influencing your path, leading you through choices that didn't make sense at the time but now feel inevitable. Think back to the moments when you felt guided towards something you couldn't logically justify, or when you felt pulled away from something that no longer resonated. Those were not random impulses. They were echoes from the version of you that already knows the path. As you sync with this higher version, you may notice a subtle shift in your inner dialogue. The voice that once questioned everything begins to soften. The voice that doubted begins to quiet. In their place emerges a sense of inner knowing that doesn't argue, doesn't rush, doesn't seek approval. It speaks in calm impulses, gentle nudges, quiet recognitions. This is the language of the self you're remembering. You may also notice that your choices feel more aligned, not because you're forcing yourself to be disciplined, but because the misaligned options no longer feel available to you. They simply fall away. This is the influence of a higher identity taking shape within your awareness. It doesn't restrict you. It clarifies you. It reveals what was never meant for you and illuminates what always was. And if the path ahead feels strangely familiar, Even when it's new, that familiarity is confirmation. It means you're entering territory your higher self has already walked in the non-linear space of consciousness. Time is not a straight line. You're syncing with a version of you that has already lived the clarity you're stepping into. That's why this moment feels like a return rather than a leap. You're not meeting your future self, you're remembering them. You're merging with the version of you that has always held the wisdom, the calm, the direction, and the resonance you're beginning to embody now. This is the quiet grace of your shift. You're not transforming into someone new. You're finally becoming someone true. There comes a moment in every transformation when awareness is no longer enough. The shift has happened internally. The understanding has settled. The recognition has unfolded. But something in you wants to anchor it. Not through effort, not through force, but through acknowledgement. Spoken intention is that acknowledgement. When you speak from a coherent state, your words don't float into the air. They imprint into the field. They crystallize the identity you've already stepped into, giving form to what has been quietly unfolding within you. A declaration is not a wish. It is not a request. It is the moment you name the truth your consciousness already knows. It is the moment you choose alignment with who you've become instead of who you used to be. And because your field is clearer now, more responsive, more attuned, a simple sentence carries more weight than it ever has before. Your words become a stabilizing force, a signal that organizes the subtle layers of your reality around this new identity. Before the declaration forms, you may feel a quiet readiness inside you, a sense of arrival, a soft grounding. It doesn't feel dramatic, but it feels sure. This is the threshold. This is the moment when the shift becomes embodied rather than observed, and the declaration is the bridge between the two. The power of the declaration comes from the fact that it reflects who you already are. You're not trying to become this version of yourself. You're naming the version that has been emerging in every choice, every moment of clarity, every inner alignment. Speaking it aloud allows your nervous system, your mind, and your awareness to unify around a single coherent intention. It is coherence made audible. Your declaration can be simple. It can be quiet. It can be spoken in your own rhythm, with your own breath, in your own voice. What matters is not the poetry of the words, but the truth behind them. A truth that feels settled, a truth that feels inevitable, a truth your consciousness has already grown into. Here is a declaration you can offer yourself, one that aligns with the identity you've been remembering. I choose the version of me that is already aligned. I step into the reality that matches who I am now. You can speak it once, you can whisper it, you can let it vibrate through you without forcing anything. The power isn't in repetition, it's in resonance. When you speak from alignment, the field responds instantly. Your awareness anchors, your identity steadies. Your new state becomes the foundation rather than the moment. And when you finish speaking it, whether aloud or within, you may feel a subtle settling, a soft clarity, a sense of completion. Not because the journey is ending, but because this phase of it has become embodied. You're no longer reaching for the shift. You're standing in it. You're no longer transforming into someone new. You're affirming the truth of who you've already become.